Well, good morning. We're going to talk this week about lighting the fuse. It was, in terms of things that I read and track and try to keep up with, this really was one of the most difficult weeks that I've had. Not the least of which is that it's supposedly spring. Somebody posted this the other day. Has anybody tried unplugging spring for 10 seconds and then plugging it back in? I think we've been spoiled. We have, I like to play golf on Saturday mornings, and we had a frost delay yesterday. But I can remember having a frost delay the first weekend in June in this place, which, if somebody can remind me why we live here, come and see me afterwards. But I actually started this week to try to update my little converging events slide, and really got lost in the weeds. You should see the draft version that I'm working on, because it's been a while since I've updated this. It is a time where a world disrupted doesn't begin to say it. I don't have a ton of slides this week, mainly because I was reading things and trying to catch up on background on a lot of other things, and I just can't keep up. So I think that's sort of indicative of the way things are going at the church right now. We're all very busy. We're all running short on time, and so I wish we would all covet your prayers as we try to get this and our other messages out each week. We do appreciate your support and your patience. It is very time consuming, and some weeks it's just it's a little more difficult than others. So we appreciate your prayers on that. And I know there's some people, Jackie Alnor is helping out getting things up on Rapture Ready, a podcast, and we're very appreciative of that. And so there's people I've promised to get back to, and I'm still making a promise to get back to you eventually when I have the time. Couple housekeeping things. I should probably take down the world blowing up slide because that doesn't, but I'll leave it up. This Saturday and next Saturday and Sunday, Jacob Prash and David Nathan will be here to do a little Moriel teaching conference. I'll be doing a prophecy update next Sunday morning at 8 a.m. If any of you want to come and show up for that. And I'm not sure what David and Jacob will be teaching about this particular weekend. They did contact me and ask me if we had a theme, and the theme was, teach the Bible. Just because we just, with some illnesses and other things going on, we just are kind of running behind. There are some very troubling things that are happening in our world and in America. I'm going to try to piece these together. And then I have some good news and bad news part at the end with regard to the Middle East. And I think I'll probably do the good news part first. But let's just look a little bit about what's going on. There's a couple things. First of all, this is a cover page of the Democratic National Committee complaint that they filed against President Trump, the Russian Federation, Donald J. Trump for president, Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Jared Kushner, George Papadopoulos, Richard Gates, and John Doe's 1 to 10. In some respects, look, I'm a lawyer, so I know how these things go. I read through this complaint. It's a rehash of everything that they would like the Mueller investigation to show. The advantage of this, or the good side of this, is that the defendants get to engage in discovery. They get to go after the Clinton email server. They get to ask for production of all those documents. And, maybe they can then send them over to the FBI and help the FBI out since this. And I see, former Assistant Director McCabe, there's been a criminal referral made. He's now talking about filing a lawsuit against the president for defamation. I think it goes nowhere. He's a public figure. It's a waste of time. And if you notice that every time something happens now, it's hard to figure out what the truth is. I mean, so for example, Mueller says Trump's not a target. The Democratic National Committee files a lawsuit that says, well, he should be because he did this, he engaged in a conspiracy with the Russian government. I was just thinking of an example before I walked up here. Now I'm having trouble remembering it. It just seems like every time something happens, there's somebody on the other side and they're saying, well, I know what it is. There was a big meeting this week at Wheaton College, Wheaton University, whatever they call it now. And what it was a group of, it started out as a dozen, and it ended up as about 50 evangelicals, leaders, movers and shakers, whatever you want to call them. The list of who attended, I don't think has been made public, but I understand it's people like Tim Keller and some other people that I would say of his ilk. Some people were concerned that in conservative evangelical leaders were not invited. It was, and here's the conflict. So I was reading some of the different news reports about it, about people trying to figure out what's going on. And One News Now reported that there was a big walkout of people because it had turned into a Trump bashing session. And because the whole point of it was, evangelicalism in the age of Trump. There was a guy, former CNN guy, Reza Aslan. Did you see that little video that he put up about how Trump is a cult leader and anybody who might support Trump is a member of a cult? Now, listen, this guy he's identified, at least in the description of the video, as a religious scholar. And he's written books on politics and Islam and Christianity. But he also, do you remember why he left CNN? Because he went to some Hindu retreat and ate human brains. Do you understand how bizarre the world has gotten? So with regard to this Wheaton meeting, so here's one report that comes out and says a bunch of people got up and walked out because they just couldn't take it. Then I was looking at the Washington Post, Sarah Pulliam Bailey. She writes, she's very much left-oriented, and she said, the meeting was fine. Christianity Today says, it was fine, everybody had a good time, and there were no problems. So now here I am, I'm trying to tell you what happened, and there are completely conflicting and opposite reports. Does this not happen on almost everything now? I mean, we talked about this with regard to the chemical attack in Syria. Now, I'm a lawyer. I put cases together. Sometimes those have been very complex cases. And one of my obligations is to present the best case I can for my client. But one of the things you have to do as a lawyer is you have to deal with bad evidence and bad facts. And so you have to look at all sides of the issue if you're going to be a good lawyer. So I do that when I'm trying to get ready here. I look at different sides of the issue, sometimes 3, 4, 5 sides of the issue before I come up here. And I must confess to you, even as somebody who's been doing this for 40 years, it's becoming increasingly difficult to come up with a coherent presentation about what reality really is. So here we have this meeting in Wheaton, and one article says, these guys walked out in a huff. Other people say, no, it didn't happen. We had Bill Hybels resigned at at Willow Creek. Now, look, I've been very critical of Willow Creek and its philosophy. That should be clear to anybody who's listened to me for any length of time. And my concern in the reason there were allegations of misconduct with members of the opposite sect on the part of Bill Hybels He called them a pack of lies and resigned. I've read a number of what the people have said, and I've seen people discussing it, and there's people saying he didn't do anything, and there are people saying he did. And how do you determine what the truth is? It's becoming, my view is, it is becoming increasingly difficult. Now, if you don't agree with that, you can say, well, no, it's not really becoming difficult, John. You're just ignoring the sources of information that I look at. Because, nobody can agree on anything anymore. I was thinking about talking about some of the different views of Ezekiel 38 and 39. And if I did, when it happens. Does it happen before the 70th week, a ways before the 70th week, right at just before the 70th week begins, right a little bit after the 70th week begins, in the middle of the 70th week, at the end of the 70th week? And then there's also a passage in Revelation that indicates there's a battle of Gog-Magog at the end of the millennium. So there are about 6 views on when the Ezekiel 38, 39 war occurs, and whether it's one war or 2 wars. And I was thinking about doing that today, but then I thought we would never get out of here if I tried to present the case for each view, even in a shorthand fashion. And of course, everybody has their own view, and everybody's view is right, and everybody else who doesn't ascribe to their view is anywhere from just wrong to a heretic. And it's like this on every issue now. I think this is part of Bible prophecy, that it will be very contentious in the last days, and people will not agree, and people will engage in a lot of disputes. And getting to the truth, though, of what's happening geopolitically is increasingly difficult. And I'll give you some examples of that today when I get to the Middle East. But this is just an example of it. And the meeting at Wheaton is another. There was another meeting. I didn't have time to pull all the clips together. I watched some of these. There was a celebration, MLK at 50, Martin Luther King at 50, down in Louisville. There was Together for the Gospel. I don't know, they did kind of a 50th anniversary celebration of Martin Luther King. I have to tell you, I've listened to David Platt. I listened to Ligon Duncan and some of the other people. There was one of the conferences had a panel with Beth Moore, who was saying that, well, people just need to learn to take criticism, which was, in my view, just dripping with hypocrisy, because any criticism of her is met with, well, how dare you say that about me or criticize me? And I did that video of Streams of Ecumenism where I played the video clips of what she actually said. And what's happening at that conference on Martin Luther King is David Platt's getting up there very emotionally. He's now, I believe he's the lead pastor, senior pastor at McLean Bible Church outside of D.C. He used to be down in Alabama. He's finishing up as head of the International Missionary Board for the Southern Baptists. And the concerns that I have, and there's a number of people that have written about it, Pulpit and Pen, and Brandon House has done some of his recent shows on it, that neo-Marxism is creeping into the church. And you watch these videos, and it's unmistakable. The sources that they're citing, and listen, when the real persecution starts, we're at the beginning of it here in America. I have a friend who's in Iraq and other Kurdish areas this week from South Africa sharing the gospel. And they're undergoing real persecution over there. I mean, people come to faith in Jesus and they can get killed. He posted some pictures of people at a prayer meeting or a church meeting in a house, and he had to black out their faces because the security services over there or Muslim groups will find us and they'll go kill the people. It's a reality. But I do think that persecution is coming here. And when it comes here, the people who are the ones you really need to watch out for will be the others who claim that they're evangelicals. Because the tactics that they're employing in these conferences and the talks that they're giving, and I would highly recommend, I don't know if they're still up, but Brandon House did a very good job on analyzing the philosophical foundations of what they're talking about and the neo-Marxism that's coming through in David Platt's and Tim Keller's talks, especially. Really, a lot of them. It's deeply disturbing to me to watch this unfold in front of me. It's a good thing I don't have many slides because I've only done one, really, and I can see that I'm 15 minutes or so into this. But, by the way, Brandon House, whether you agree with him on everything or not, he was going to do a live conference up in Appleton, Wisconsin, and then in Minneapolis. It was either last weekend or 2 weeks ago. The CARE, and when you say CARE, you could say Muslim Brotherhood and it'd be the same thing, and other groups, Antifa, and it appears the Southern Poverty Law Center contacted the hotels, and less than 48 hours before these conferences were to begin, the hotel said, you can't come and do your conference here. They had contracts that they had signed, and at the last minute, the hotel said, nope, don't have to do it. They tried to do the one in Minneapolis. They really couldn't, it was being done in Bloomington, which is sort of a large Somalian community. They tried to talk to the sheriff in that area or the police in that area, and they really couldn't get any assurances that they would be protected. There were physical threats of violence made. And so he had to cancel his conferences. Now, you think they're going to do that again? So what people need to do is they need to be in prayer for ministries in churches like ours that rent their facilities, because we don't know what is going to happen. And, it's one of our concerns here. I don't want to say fears, but it's a concern of ours. So, and is it going to get worse? Here's a proposed bill, 2926, Assembly Bill 2926. It's made it through committee. Essentially what this bill is California. So now you know, okay, so it's left wing. And this bill is essentially to shut down homeschoolers in California. Now, part of the bill my understanding is part of the bill was amended. They were going to require that homeschool teachers have the same certification and credentials as school teachers. There's provisions in the bill that you can have unannounced health inspections and other inspections of the place where you're having your home school or private school. Now, they'll deny, well, we're just trying to protect the children, they'll say. And guess what? That's the big lie. They're trying to shut down Christianity. I know Pastor Jack Hibbs talked about this, I think last Sunday, and I know he's been on the leading edge of it. But this is a major concern. Here's another concern. I think this one is even worse. Assembly Bill 2943. It says unlawful business practice, sexual orientation change efforts. And it goes through and it says consumer law. It talks about consumer law, and you're not allowed to engage in deceptive practices. And so what they're doing in this bill is it would essentially ban any book or any counseling that would be due for somebody who is going through gender dysphoria, wanting to change from a man to a woman, even in a young child. It would be illegal and a deceptive business practice under California law. Even if the person didn't want to change and wanted to stay a male, you are now prohibited by law, or would be. This passed committees in the Senate and the House in California, 8-1 and 8-2. It was passed by the House, and it's now going to the California Senate. And do you think Jerry Brown will veto it, by the way? Do you think the Senate will vote it down? And so churches in California, it would essentially, and I know that people on the left, they always say, oh, you're just making a slippery slope argument. You don't understand what it will do. It would ban the use of the Bible in counseling sessions, at least, if not ban the sale of the Bible completely. In America, folks, in the United States, First Amendment, no law restricting what? Freedom of speech or the free exercise of religion. It means nothing to a leftist. Get that through your head. They lie. They do not tell the truth. They make stuff up. And they're going to come for all of us unless somebody stops it. And I know you can say this. Here is sexual orientation change efforts means any practices that seek to change an individual's sexual orientation. This includes efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions or to eliminate or to reduce sexual or romantic attractions or feelings toward individuals of the same sex. Sex change operations, though, can be, well, here's what's excluded. Does not include, okay, so you can't help them stay the same sex, but here's what is not included in the definition of sexual orientation change efforts. Does not include psychotherapies that provide acceptance, support, and understanding of clients or the facilitation of clients' coping, social support, and identity exploration and development, including sexual orientation neutral interventions to prevent or address unlawful conduct or unsafe sexual practices, and do not seek to change sexual orientation. And this is the specific act. Advertising, offering to engage in, or engaging in sexual orientation change efforts with an individual would be prohibited by law. Is this any surprise? Gentleman's Quarterly wrote this 21 books that you don't have to read. Number 12 on the list was the Bible. It says in here, those who have read it know there are some good parts, but overall it is certainly not the finest thing that man has ever produced. It is repetitive, self-contradictory, sententious, foolish, and even at times, ill-intentioned. If the thing you heard was good about the Bible was the nasty bits, then I propose reading this book called The Notebook. Well, in Australia, this is where this is going. This is from, I think, Queensland, Courier Mail. A diversity push from birth. Because now, of course, what did you have? Did you have a boy or a girl? And how long will it be till it's illegal to say? Because we don't want to force somebody's opinion. I got into a discussion with you. You're just forcing your opinion on somebody. I'm just saying what the science shows. It's crazy. A friend of mine, I blacked out her name. She said I could use it, but I don't want to get her hit with spam. She got on her Facebook page, hey, 5 years ago you made this post. You want to repost it? And here's what the post said. God's gospel is not only the greatest news that anyone could ever hear, but it is an offense to those who believe that their religion will save them. The gospel is so exclusive that it dares to say all other faiths and religions are false. So this was in the Facebook algorithms. This popped up in her feed. And if you're on Facebook, you get these things like, hey, you did this 2 years ago. Do you want to remind everybody? And so she said yes. She then got this from Facebook. We removed this post because it looks like spam and doesn't follow our community standards. You were the one that suggested it to her. That Alice through the looking glass thing? It's insane. So let's look at the Middle East. This will be a little bit, I hope it'll be coherent. But here's an example. So over here on the left, we have Israel sets the red line for Russia, and there's a lot of tension right now between Israel and Russia. Israel, up till now, has had a agreement with Russia that, look, we'll let you know when we're attacking things, because we're only doing things, we don't want to attack your troops, we don't want to bomb your facilities, but we cannot allow Iran to establish a beachhead in Syria from which to make it easier for them to launch attacks against us. We view Iran as an existential threat. They run around all the time and they say, we want to annihilate the Jews. So we are concerned about that, and so we will let you know. Now, with regard to the T4 attack a little over a week ago, the T4 base attack, so we had the claimed either true or false chemical attack in Duma. Israel took advantage of that and went and attacked Iranian targets, killed Iranian soldiers, Iranian Revolutionary Guards, which appears to be the first time that they've done that. They did not call Russia in advance. Russia's now said, okay, we're going to give Syria this S-300 missile defense system. There was a cargo ship or two that came into Tartus, unloaded, and as they were unloading, all of a sudden, the whole area was enveloped in a cloud of smoke. Clearly set off to hide whatever was going on from satellite or other reconnaissance flights. I also saw a post, I don't think I have the picture in my presentation today. You really can find a lot of stuff on the internet. So somebody posts who follows military websites and military activity, posting a link of all the, I believe it was the French, the US, and Israeli air command flights that were going off on the Eastern Mediterranean near Syria at the same time. So Israel has a plane, I think it's EITAN, Etan. I think it's made by Grumman in Atlanta or Long Beach, and it has the ability, it appears, to jam radar. If you remember back to the attack on the Syrian reactor in 2007, about 10 years ago, Israel was able to fly up the coast, fly across southern Turkey, come down through Syria, at some point drop the extra fuel tanks that they needed, bomb the facility, and get out of there. I think it was 7 or 9 aircraft that were involved in that attack. And they destroyed the reactor. It's the information I have is that they never had a shot fired at them. That attack came shortly after Syria had installed the latest Russian air defense system. I believe what happened was this aircraft went up and it jammed everything, or it created shadows of planes that weren't there. So they didn't know what was going on or who to shoot at, or maybe there were too many to shoot at, and they didn't do anything, and the reactor was destroyed, thank goodness. So now we have that. So then here is the next one. It says, the case for international action against Iran and Syria. And people are saying we should go because there was a chemical attack. No, we shouldn't go. There was not a chemical attack. It doesn't make any sense for Assad to do this. And it's hard to tell what's true. And everybody says, well, there's no evidence of a chemical attack. So there was a group, organization for the OPCW, Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, went into Duma. Now, all the rebels have surrendered. They've left the area. They've been bused to other places. And so the OPCW goes into Duma And what happens? They can't do the sampling because they're fired at. And they're reporting that Russian and Syrians are trying to prevent them from getting in there to do anything until the site gets cleaned up. But then everybody says, well, no, Assad would never do it. So I'll be honest with you, I don't know what the truth is, okay? I really don't. And now it's very confusing. Trump said he did this, and it's a one-time thing, and it's not going to be over. So then Trump had said, I want to leave Syria. So Macron comes out and says, I convinced Trump to remain in Syria. And just like everything else in the world, wait 5 minutes, and you'll get the complete opposite. Trump, White House, Trump still wants to withdraw forces from Syria. So now what's the story? I don't know. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. It's very hard to be dogmatic about future events. That's what I'm learning through all of this. So while we have all these different views on how Bible prophecy will play out and the exact timing and everything, I think we should be looking for patterns. I think we should be paying attention to those things. I think we should be considering the different scenarios, but the ultimate proof of how this will be fulfilled, prophecies will be fulfilled and play out, will be when it actually happens. And then somebody can stand up and say, this is that which was predicted by the prophets. Until then, look, there's certain things, of course, certain ideas that are just absolutely insane. So here is the human rights groups are bristling at the latest State Department report. And I haven't seen much criticism for what it said, but I've seen a lot of criticism for what it doesn't say. Because why? Well, for the last 8 years, we've had a administration that's adopted a certain political viewpoint. So when they talked about human rights abuses, they talked about reproductive rights in the report. This report, issued by the State Department under Trump, does not mention reproductive rights. And so now everybody's got, they're all in all Twitter about what's going on and what's going to happen with abortion rights. That's what reproductive rights are. And we're giving money to it looks like we're giving money to Planned Parenthood under the new budget. Planned Parenthood came out and said they're going to spend tens of millions of dollars this fall to elect people that agree with their view. Now, you can say, well, we're not using any of the public money. Well, you're spending tens of millions of dollars that you might have had to spend on your own things, but now that we've given you, so the whole thing is insane. And so the human rights, or the State Department comes out and says, listen, Russia and China are threats. But one of the biggest things was human rights groups blasted the State Department's annual human rights report released on Friday, which removed the term reproductive rights and softened language on human rights violations in a number of countries, including Yemen and the Dominican Republic. Now, in 2016, this report, issued under the Obama administration, talked about this. Israel and the occupied territories, and that's what they call Judea and Samaria, or all of the West Bank. They call it the occupied territories. Now they're all upset because the 2017 report calls it Israel, Golan Heights, West Bank, and Gaza. And they don't call it occupied territories. And so the human rights groups are all upset about he's not adopting the conventional line. This report in the Times, Russia has hacked into millions of computers. I saw a similar report this week that North Korea, which appears to be backing off its desire for a nuclear weapon, I'm not sure I believe it yet, but they have also become some of the best computer hackers in the world. So maybe they think we'll just hack America to death and we don't need to worry about spending, it's plutonium, you got all the waste problems and all this stuff. We'll just hack them and shut down their power grid or something. So maybe that's why, maybe they're confident they can do that, and that's why they're doing. Now, here's an important issue. Turkey. Turkey continues provocations. And what happened was the Prime Minister of Greece, and this is from the Gatestone Institute and some other publications, Turkey targeting Greece. What happened was Turkey is now making claims to certain islands in the Aegean Sea. They've even had military go ashore, supposedly to take down Turkish flags that had been raised over these islands, but then they leave and the reports are the Turkish flags are still there. There's concerns about oil in that region. I think Turkey is trying to get control of gas flow that might be coming from Israel up through Cyprus and then Greece over to Europe to compete with Russia. All of this, I think, what we've seen from Turkey just in the last week, aside from the confusing part, is the troubling part, is that this really does play into end time scenarios, because Turkey would appear to be a major player. Turkey is, outside of the U.S., the largest army in NATO, largest armed forces in NATO. Did you know that? It is the 17th largest economy in the world. So it's not it's not something that you can just dismiss out of hand. Now, they have a demographic problem, just like Russia has a demographic problem, and Europe has a demographic problem. The Kurds are producing far more children than the Turks. And that's why I think some of these prophetic scenarios are more likely to play out in a very short window, because of the demographic problems that these countries are facing. They've got to do something. Russia has a major problem, Islamic problem. That's why they're involved in Syria trying to deal with that problem, figure out how to deal with that problem. Iran has a demographic problem. Saudi Arabia does not appear to. They have a lot, their birth rate is still pretty high, but they're in a state of turmoil. There are reports of shots, potential coup attempt in Saudi Arabia. I don't know how credible they are. Again, these happen in places where it's very difficult to get firsthand information. They shut down all social media in Saudi Arabia. That's not a good sign. And what happens if somebody goes in and takes out the king and the crown prince? Now we have a civil war in Syria. Would that affect world oil prices? Could. It really could. What if somebody gets control and they don't like Iran, and they go take out what's the big Karg Island, which is responsible for about 60 to 75% of the Iranian economy, because it's where their big oil port is. That's why I called this lighting the fuse, because it's not that people have actually lit the fuse. Maybe it should have been called getting ready to light the fuse, or it's sort of like they've taken the fuse, poured gasoline on it, and then given matches and lighters to a bunch of crazy people standing around the end of the fuse. And it only takes one of them to set it off. And that's sort of how I feel that the world is right now. So Turkey is threatening Greece. Daniel 10 talks about, and maybe you can do a Q&A and ask Jacob the question. He's done a good teaching on Daniel chapter 10. And he thinks that Turkey, Iran will go to war. We know in Daniel chapter 10 it talks about this evil force behind Persia, Iran, the prince of Persia. And it says also the prince of Greece is coming. Well, that area I think could include Turkey. I think it does. And so now we have Turkey and Iran. And while there are appearances on the surface that they're cooperating in Syria and that type of thing, that cooperation, in my opinion, is about that deep, if that. I would make it, you wouldn't be able to see it if I put my fingers as close as I wanted to. And Turkey, I've talked about this. Turkey has made up maps, and Erdogan has given speeches about his Turkish brethren throughout Central Asia. And these are countries that I think are all part of this Ezekiel 38-39 alliance. And it appears that Turkey is part of this in Persia, but is it the Persia that we know today? Or is there a war that takes place between Turkey and Persia, and that's why Persia and all those countries, the stand republics that we talk about in Central Asia, which are Islamic, Sunni Islamic, are coming against Israel? And Erdogan, he makes these statements all the time, and it doesn't get much play in the press. And I'm suggesting to you that it's troubling. I mean, this report from Foreign Policy, Turkey's new maps are reclaiming the Ottoman Empire. I've talked about that a number of times. Also this week, Turkey threatens France. Here's what the Gatestone Institute said. Turkey's expansionist goals seem to be inspired by a seeming historic aggression, hatred towards Greeks, neo-Ottomanism, and an Islamic tradition of conquest or jihad. There are physical borders and there are borders in our hearts, Erdogan said. Some people ask us, why do you take an interest in Iraq, Syria, Georgia, Crimea, Karabakh, Azerbaijan, the Balkans, and North Africa, Libya? He's referred to Libya as his brothers. By the way, Libya is the only Arab part of that coalition in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And here is Erdogan talking about his Libyan brothers because they share the same religion. None of these lands is foreign to us. Is it possible to divide Rize, R-I-Z-E, in Turkey from Batumi in Georgia? How can we consider Edom in Turkey to be separate from Thessaloniki in Greece? How can we think that Gaziantep in Turkey has nothing to do with Aleppo in Syria, Mardin in Turkey with Al-Hassa in Syria, or Slirt in Turkey with Mosul in Iraq? From Thrace to Eastern Europe, with every step you take, you will see traces of our ancestors. We would need to deny our true selves for us to think Gaza and Siberia, with whom we speak the same language and share the same culture, is separate from us. To take an interest in Iraq, Syria, Libya, Crimea, Karabakh, Bosnia, and other brotherly regions is both the duty and the right of Turkey. Turkey is not just Turkey. The day we give up on these things will be the day we give up our freedom and future. How many of you heard that reported in any mainstream media outlet over the last few years? Or this week? Well, it's happening, and it does fit Ezekiel 38 just like a glove. Now, I meant to mention this back in the early part of this. This is a memo, Orange County Department of Education, the lawyer for that department wrote a memo about people removing their children from certain classes because they didn't want their children taught this. And they said, well, when it's talking about sex itself, you can probably remove them, but if it's talking about sexual orientation and gender identity, you can't. You can teach them at home if you want. So now what's the alternative? Either put up with it or take them out of the schools. I mean, seriously. It's, here is, so back to the Middle East. This week was the 70th anniversary of Israel. A great time, a great celebration. Now the independence was declared on May 14th, 1948, but the 5th of Adar is the Jewish calendar, and that occurred this week, so that's why they had the 70th anniversary celebration this week. And what did they find? This is a report from Haaretz about a city discovered down in the Hebron Hills that appears to date to the time of King David and may support the fact that there actually was a King David. And it seems like almost every week they're coming out with these finds now. I don't think there's any mistake about this. I meant to mention this. This is Trump this is foreign policy. Trump, the elephants in the room. Trump needs a plan for Israel's confrontation with Iran. And it says this: Tehran and Moscow are becoming the arbiters of the Middle East, and Israel's relationship with both is growing increasingly tense. Boy, is that ever an understatement. And so we had this meeting a week or so ago in Ankara with people that would identify these three people as three of the participants of the Ezekiel 38-39 war. Now, I don't think the alliance is as strong as people are making it out to be, because there's tension between Turkey and Iran particularly. And so here's what Erdogan gave a speech. Yesterday I spoke with Mr. Trump, and I'll have a call with Mr. Putin today, and I will speak with him. Together we will discuss how we can stop this chemical massacre. Discuss it. So he believes it happened. The aim of our operation on Syrian soil today is to provide a safe future in their own homes. For the millions who face the oppression and the massacres of the regime. So there's tension between Syria and Turkey, and they're encroaching into that territory. Russia's there. They're trying to keep Turkey at bay. They're trying to keep, I think they're trying to keep Iran at bay. And it's becomes an increasingly complicated mess by the week. And Erdogan is clever. He's playing NATO off and saying, look, I don't want to leave NATO, but I need your help in these things that we're doing, because these are attacks that are coming on a NATO member, and you should support me. And he's really clever in the way that he's putting all this together. So I do think, while I see the beginnings of a sort of Ezekiel 38 and 39 alliance, I don't think it's a hard and fast one, because there's a lot of tension within that. And if there is this war that may come between Turkey and Iran, that would change how that alliance comes together, wouldn't it? It's very interesting. I say this next part is there were more protests in Gaza. There were some protesters killed. And so Lebanon Daily Star, front page. Arab News, front page. New York Times, front page. Now, I report on these things all the time. I didn't have time to go back and check all my prior presentations. Were the knife attacks that have been occurring over the last few years in Israel, and the car attacks and that type of thing, I mean, just a little bit before we went to Israel a year ago, they're down at the promenade, the Hill of Evil Council, I think it was, where the UN headquarters is, appropriately, in Jerusalem. There was a truck ran into a group of soldiers and killed a couple of them, young soldiers, just a few weeks before we went to Israel last year, almost exactly a year ago. I don't remember that making the front page of the New York Times, and I could be wrong. But, you know, these things happen with Gaza, where people are doing things. Hang on a second here. I remember taking pictures, capturing pictures. I don't think I have. They flew like a loaded with explosives kite on fire in the shape of a swastika from Gaza into Israel. It's just incredible. And what you see at the time of the 70th anniversary of Israel, you have this growing anti-Semitism. I mentioned a couple weeks ago that the Labor Party is being torn apart over charges of anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom. Jeremy Corbyn. At Passover, he went to a Seder with a really anti-Israel, anti-Jewish guy. Anti-modern state of Israel. And this week, people in Parliament got up and gave speeches about how bad this anti-Semitism was. This lady, Berger is her name. There was another. These are Labor Party members who were speaking in the House of Commons during the debate time about and they're Jewish, and the anti-Semitism that they have faced. I'm going to play a clip for you of a very eloquent man. I probably don't agree with him politically at all. He's a lefty, Labor Party member, John Mann, who talks a little bit about his own personal experience. Listen to this.
John Mann.
When my family helped form the Labour Party in Leeds in 1906, they suffered terribly because of that. The Jewish community in Leeds stood alongside them and supported them. That's why I took on the role 13 years ago, chairing the all-party group. I didn't expect today, when Labour members stand in solidarity with our Jewish colleagues and with the Jewish community, for not just no solidarity, but to be targeted by an organisation called Momentum, which has happened to all of us who stood in solidarity. But worse than that, explicitly targeting Jewish members of the Parliamentary Labour Party because they are Jewish. That is what is going on at the moment. I didn't expect, when I took on this voluntary cross-party role, for my wife to be sent by a Labour Marxist anti-Semite, a dead bird, through the post. I didn't expect my son, after an Islamist death threat, to open the door in the house on his own as a schoolboy to the bomb squad. I didn't expect my wife, in the last few weeks, from a leftist anti-Semite in response to the demonstration, to be threatened with rape. I didn't expect my daughter, similarly, and have to be rung up in the last few weeks by special branch to check out her movements in this country. No, I didn't expect any of that. It doesn't end. It doesn't end with me and my family. It doesn't end with Jewish members of Parliament here. Where this stuff ends, where this stuff ends, is what happened in Copenhagen, is what happened in Brussels, it's what happened in France repeatedly, including 4 weeks ago. People murdered because they are Jewish. That's where this ends, and we know where history takes that. That's a reality now. Give way.
Give him a minute.
My honourable friend is making an incredibly powerful and strong speech, which I wholly associate myself with. But would he also agree with me, the deep shame that I feel, and I think many people feel within the Labour Party, that incidents have been repeatedly reported over and over and over and over again, and yet action quite often has not been taken at all?
It's constant. It's this weekend in my constituency. Last night in my constituency. It's constant. Explicit anti-Semitism, and then the bigger group, the excusers for anti-Semitism, the people who say this is something to do with who the leader of the Labour Party is and challenging him. No, it isn't. In the 13 years I've been doing it, and what Jewish people say to me now, what they say to me now, is different to what they said 13 years ago. Is it true that there's a growth in anti-Semitism? 5 years ago, Jewish people would come up to me and they'd say, we're concerned that there's a rise in anti-Semitism. I'm stopped in the street everywhere I go now by Jewish people saying to me, very discreetly, I am scared. Young people, old people, I am scared. And you see what's happened in France, and you see what's happened in Belgium, and you see what happened in Copenhagen, and then you understand why people are scared. People who are scared, young Jewish members, to go to a Labour Party meeting with me because they're fearful of how they will be intimidated, threatened, how their identity will be challenged. Any Jewish person is entitled to say and define that they are an anti-Zionist, a non-Zionist, and I have no right to challenge them. Any Jewish person, as the vast majority do, are entitled to say, I am a Zionist, and I have no right to deny them that, and those that do are racists. And just that change in language, by making the word Zionist as a pejorative insult by the Labour Party, just that change would alter the dialogue in this country in a very big way. We all have a choice on what we do. Stand in solidarity with the Jewish members of Parliament under attack today. That is the role of parliamentarians.
Well, good for him. And this is tearing apart the Labour Party in England and the UK. And good, it should, because they are racist. They are evil. They don't even care about what happened in Copenhagen and Stockholm and Nice. By the way, almost all of those attacks have a connection with Turkey. And how is Erdogan threatening France? If you don't do what I want, I'll let more refugees overrun your continent. This is very serious stuff, my friends. This is Bible prophecy stuff, my friends. It is undeniable. And this comes 70 years after David Ben-Gurion went to the government headquarters in Tel Aviv and read a proclamation on May 14th, 1948, the 5th of Adar on the Jewish calendar, to proclaim that there would be a Jewish nation formed. The United Nations, I've talked about this many times over the last few months, how 70 years ago the United Nations gave a vote and by a 2/3 majority said there should be a Jewish state on that land.
This right is the natural right of the Jewish people to be masters of their own fate, like all other nations, in their own sovereign state, which would open the gates of the homeland wide to every Jew and confer upon the Jewish people the status of a fully privileged member of the Committee of Nations. Accordingly, we members of the National Executive, representatives of the Jewish community of Eretz Israel and of the Zionist movement, are here assembled on the day of the termination of the British mandate over Eretz Israel. And by virtue of our natural and historic right, and the strength of the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, here declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, to be known as the State of Israel.
In Israel, Natalie Portman, actress, was to be given a $2 million Genesis Prize, and she refused to accept the prize because of the atrocities of Benjamin Netanyahu. What a fool she is. You can go to the Golan Heights today and look north 35, 40 miles. You see Damascus over there in the corner? That's the center of Damascus, the big square in the center of Damascus. Here, 15 miles away in the lower right-hand corner is the Damascus International Airport. In the middle, 3 miles from the center of Damascus is the Al Yarmouk refugee camp. Here it is. You go to Mount Gerizim and above Nablus and look down in Nablus and you will see a very densely populated area. That area, it's called it's 8/10 of a square mile. It has 120 some thousand registered refugees and probably at least twice that in population. In less than a square mile. It has been there for 70 years. Under the Assad regime for 45 years. Does anybody talk about the atrocities of Bashar al-Assad or his father with regard to the Palestinians in that camp? Do you hear a peep of it in the media? You don't hear a word about it. These people are used as political pawns. When we were there in the Golan Heights in 2011, there were about 250,000, some said maybe as much as 400,000 people living in that area. One of the most densely populated places on Earth. And they're kept there for 7 decades. 7 decades, my friends. As political pawns. Today, this is a very famous picture taken a few years ago, published in the New York Times. People say, oh, it's fake. They were passing out free food. Do you see the buildings? I talk about this already. It's like that all over Syria. And I know they're in the midst of a civil war. And wars are terrible. By 2014, between 2011 and 2014, they went from about 250,000 or more to 18,000 people. They were forced out as refugees. They were put on the road. ISIS took over the area. It's kind of gone back and forth. And here's a little video of this operation that took place just the other day. You see a Syrian jet and the thing there flying over. They're getting rid of the Syrian army video, getting rid of the last of the rebels. About 12,000 more people. This is from the Lebanon paper. It says that what's going on there with the movement of the population might constitute a war crime. But people don't accept awards because of the atrocities of Benjamin Netanyahu. What a crazy, mixed up world we live in. People are deluded, they're deceived. They need Jesus. It's the only hope. But in the midst of that, I just have a few more things. We got a little bit of a late start today. This great celebration. This is just a little bit of it from the other night at Mount Herzl in Jerusalem. The celebration, it was really one of the more
Ladies and gentlemen,
very well produced.
The Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, and Mrs. Sarah Netanyahu, accompanied by the head of IDF Home Front Command, Major General Tamir Yadai, and the Prime Minister Military Secretary Brigadier General Eliezer Toledano.
ליום הבא אני נשבע במחשבות, בהרגשות, בכוונות אני נשבע. בחיי אני נשבע כמו פרפר אש, כמו גופי המתרגש, באהבה נשבע. וכשאור היום יכבה, יישאר לי עוד הרבה.
By the way, these lights here that you see, they go into different shapes. The 300 drones with lights on them. I would be freaking out if I was there. How did they do that? I want those.
Me
think it's a dove. Yeah. I'll let it go till this is. I think the ending of it is pretty good. I'm gonna move it forward a little bit. There you see it says 70. So really tremendous. You can find it, the video, in a number of places. It's a couple hours long, but it's one of the most well-produced things I've ever seen in my life. So let me just finish with this. While they're doing that, Iran comes out this week and says, this is the vice commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, threatens to annihilate Israel. Hezbollah is boasting about the rockets that it has. His Iranian general warns all. He's tweeting this. Here's what he tweeted. Hands are on the trigger and missiles are ready and will be launched at any moment. That enemy has a sinister plot. North and west of Israel are at the intersection of fire. You will not escape. You will live in the dragon's mouth. Don't trust in your air bases. They're within reach. Don't have hope in the US and UK. When they arrive, you're not there. Smallest goal will be your existence. You can't bear. When you escape, you'll have no way but to the sea. And I'm going to turn off the sound on this. I want to show you one more thing, and we're done. Did you notice the symbology used in this presentation? Well, this is the menorah, and then later what did they have? They had a fig tree. Question, did Jesus mention the fig tree in connection with end times Bible prophecy? You think it's time to pay attention? There's no hope for this world but Jesus Christ and the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is the only hope. That is the only thing that you can cling on to. It is what drives us here, is to inform people of what's going on and what's coming and what the solution is. And that's believing on Jesus Christ for the salvation of your sins, because he will come back as a king. In Ezekiel chapter 36, it says God makes a prophecy related to Ezekiel about the land. Say to the mountains and the land and the valleys, I'm bringing my people back. Now listen, I know, and every Bible prophecy teacher who loves Israel knows, they need Jesus. But God has a plan, and he works that out on a couple of levels. Ultimately, they'll be brought back, and they'll become the people of, the faithful remnant will become the people of God. He brings them back into the land, and he says it throughout Ezekiel chapter 36. You don't deserve this. You went into all the nations of the world, and you didn't learn your lesson. You played the harlot here, you played the harlot there. But because my word's at stake, I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to raise you up as a people again, and I'll put a new heart within you. And we're waiting anxiously for that day. So, it's been an incredible week. Let's pray. Father, thanks so much. Pray, Lord, we pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We pray that you will help us to stand as faithful witnesses until you call us home. That you'll give us opportunities to share the gospel, that people will be receptive to this, that we'll be able to say the right things to overcome frankly, the delusion of our culture. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.